It has been a hot minute, hey? Far out. We have some catching up to do. There's been so much time has passed. No, I took a little break from question time because we were kind of catching up. But now some more have been released, and I all of a sudden realized we're actually really behind. So this one is from the 15th of February, so it feels like ages ago. But there's actually only been 5 question times since then. So we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. Anyway, a couple of interesting things happen in this one. It goes for a little while. I think the tactic that Liberal was trying to employ here was to kind of run Labor out of questions, and eventually they did. Bunch of points of order from Labor as well, which, don't go to relevance or anything really, so a bit more of those shenanigans. And we see some questions just to random MPs from Liberal, which is interesting. I'm not sure whether they're trying to remind people that these guys exist for the upcoming election. Maybe they're trying to, get viewers to think, oh yeah, that's my local MP. Oh, okay, I might vote for them. I don't know what the logic is, but there's just heaps and heaps of questions this question time, which, you don't often see. As we now know, being regular viewers of the Scobany Yob question time review videos. Congratulations on being part of the prized 5-view crew. Anyway, straight into it. First question comes from our good friend Albo, and it's not really a question. I think this is kind of just his way of letting everyone know that, yes, he knows what's happening in Ukraine, because his question is basically just tell everyone what's happening in Ukraine, ScoMo. And so ScoMo does. It's not very interesting. Anyway, check it out.
Questions without notice. Are there any questions? The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. This Parliament stands united in support of Ukrainian sovereignty and in opposition to Russia's attempt to intimidate the government and the people of Ukraine. Can the Prime Minister outline the steps he has taken to convey this Parliament's support to his Ukrainian counterpart, and can the Prime Minister provide the House with an update on the current situation in Ukraine?
Anyway, ScoMo has a jab at China.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister for Foreign Affairs has been in regular contact with our counterparts on these issues. And I do note that the Chinese government, together with the Russian government, have been banding together on this issue, and the Chinese government has not denounced what is occurring in Ukraine. And I would urge the Chinese government to denounce those actions and to allow an appropriate response through the United Nations, rather than resisting that being done through the National Security Committee.
Interesting. Then we get a question from Liberal, so just another one of those ads. Anyway, this one is to the bill that they're trying to pass on immigration and deportation, that one that had the Novak Djokovic kind of jab from Albo from the last question time, if you can remember.
The member for Moncrief has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please outline to the House the importance of the Morrison government's actions to strengthen the character test, so that we can quickly deport non-citizens who commit violent or sexual offences? Is the Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Anyway, and ScoMo just goes on to talk about how they've had this bill in Parliament for 1,200 days, and the weakness of Anthony Albanese is demonstrated in the fact that he's not supporting it. And because he uses the word weakness, obviously, old mate from the opposition stands up and he's like, point of order, how dare you use such language? And the Speaker's like, yeah, a bit inappropriate, mate.
Labor and the Greens have been denying us this change for the last 1,200 days, Mr Speaker. And the reason for that is the weakness of the Leader of the Labor Party, Mr Speaker. He will not stand up, as he wouldn't stand up, Mr Speaker, on these issues. The Leader of the Labor Party.
The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Under Standing Order 90, and I refer to your previous rulings on character attacks.
Yeah, I will ask the Prime Minister just to reflect on the words he's using. The Prime Minister has the call.
Anyway, so when ScoMo returns to the answer, he just goes on with all the things that Albo's opposed. And member of Opposition Business stands up and he's like, oh, you can't, like, these aren't really alternative approaches that are relevant to the actual question. These are just alternative approaches full stop. So, can you really do that? And then you got Dutton, he stands up and he's like, oh, actually, yes, you can. And also, there was nothing wrong with what the Prime Minister did in the previous point of order. I just had to kind of, think about it for a little while. I don't know why he's bringing that up now.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In whatever portfolio I've been in, particularly in immigration or as Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Labor Party has opposed the measures that I've sought to take forward to keep Australians secure, including this one now. He was opposed to offshore processing. He was opposed to temporary protection visas. He was opposed to boat turnbacks, Mr Speaker. He was opposed to mandatory detention, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister is the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Well, on direct relevance, he's now going well beyond the remit of the question, and he's also referring some of the things on the list are things that Labor introduced.
The Leader of the House.
Sure, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister was asked in the question about alternative approaches. Entirely appropriate for him to go to alternative approaches. And, Mr Speaker, a reference is made to Section 90 of or Standing Order 90, which says, Mr Speaker, all imputations of improper motives to a member and all personal reflections on other members shall be considered highly disorderly. Now, Mr Speaker, there is no suggestion whatsoever that the Prime Minister, in laying out the factual track record of the Leader of the Opposition, it cannot be disorderly, Mr Speaker.
The most recent point of order raised by the Manager of Opposition Business is in relation to alternative approaches. The concern is that alternative approaches doesn't give a right to address any alternative approaches. The Prime Minister was, in my view, broadly on point in relation to the question. The request to comment as to whether there are any alternative approaches does give the Prime Minister the opportunity to address other approaches, and the Prime Minister has the call.
Anyway, the next question is from the Shadow Treasurer. So he's the member for Rankin, Jim Chalmers. And his question is a bit tongue-in-cheek. He points to a news article that's come out, basically accusing one of the Liberal MPs this time of being behind inheritance taxes. And we all know that Frydenberg's not a fan of inheritance taxes. I did a little bit of digging, and the actual words of the MP were that, it's not fair that we have such high taxes on, entrepreneurs and people that make a lot of money. And then you've got these other people that just kind of inherit all their money from their parents. So you've got millionaires on both sides, but only the ingenious, inventive millionaires are the ones being taxed. And, all the lazy freeloaders who are also millionaires, they're not getting taxed. What gives? And he was basically arguing that we should have lower taxes for people that make heaps and heaps of money, because why should we penalise people for being ingenious and for, being innovative? Anyway, Labor interpreted that to mean we should have taxes for the people who inherit their wealth, which is an inheritance tax. And so they're like, oh, bro, this guy wants inheritance taxes. And he said, no, I never said that. And so Frydenberg just pretty much dodges the question. I don't know why he doesn't address it directly, but he basically instead just puts it all on Albo again. And so we get like 50 points of order throughout this question. It's hard to summarise. I'll just let you check it out.
I give the call to the member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer, and I refer to his previous answers in this House and to this report in today's Financial Review headlined "Liberal MP backs inheritance taxes."
The member for Rankin.
Now that the Treasurer's desperate scare campaign has blown up in his face, will he stop spending his day poring over speeches from more than 30 years ago, stop trawling his opponents' websites, abandon his unhinged scare campaigns and just do his job for once?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the 12th man of politics, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer, and thank you, comrade. Now,
member for Morton is warned.
The member for McKellar, he has said He never has supported an inheritance tax. But it's not something
Member
that the
for
Leader
Rankin.
of the Opposition could ever say. It's not something that the Leader of the Opposition could ever say. Because this is what the Leader of the Opposition, the alternative Prime Minister of Australia, has said. I am pleased to move this resolution calling upon the government to consider the imposition of an inheritance tax.
The point of order is on the basis of relevance. The question didn't ask for alternative approaches.
I don't have a copy of the transcript of the question, but the Treasurer was asked about alternative taxes and whether they've worked it or not, and whether he would abandon a scare campaign. I mean, the question is very broad. I'll ask the Treasurer to remain as relevant to the question as possible, but it is a very broad question. The Treasurer has the call.
The Leader of the Opposition has supported wealth taxes, Mr Speaker, and has said that Australia should get its priorities back in balance. Now, the Leader of the Opposition
The Treasurer will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, just on disorderly conduct, I'm just wanting to clarify, is the reason that you're saying this is in order is because the question referred to his unhinged scare campaign, and as long as he gives another unhinged scare campaign, he's being relevant.
The Manager of Opposition Business, that is not an appropriate. The Manager of Opposition Business knows that that's not an appropriate point of order. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition wants the Australian people to forget his own words. And despite protests that you no longer stand for those things, the fact is you have said those things. Oh, no.
The Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. It goes to disorderly conduct.
Well,
it goes to disorderly conduct. It is not in order for a minister to just stand at the dispatch box and give a three-minute attack based upon goodness knows what, when the question was about today's front page.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. I'll just say this. These things go both ways, and depending on how a question is phrased, that will or may elicit a certain response. So it's a double-edged sword. The Treasurer has the call.
I think that's fair. Like, he basically didn't ask a question in the first place. It was just like, you don't like inheritance taxes, and yet one of your MPs does. And so, like, how do you answer that? So Frydenberg kind of can pretty much say whatever he wants. So, yeah, they bit themselves in the foot. Is that a saying? I don't know. They bit themselves in the foot with that one. I don't think that's a saying. Anyway, moving on. The next question's for Barnaby, and it's just about outback roads, like roads in rural communities. And Barnaby's just like, the Liberals and Nationals will always repair your roads. I don't know. He's not a very exciting question or answer. He just, talks about rural roads and how they're always going to look out for them. But he does mention alternative approaches. And he doesn't really talk about alternative approaches insofar as infrastructure or roads or anything like that is concerned. He basically just says Labor and Greens won't do anything. And so I guess his argument is they don't have alternative approaches, but he kind of just comments on the fact that Labor and Greens are going to form a coalition. And it's like, that's not really relevant to the question. No one stands up for a point of order though, so.
I know that we have in so many areas the forgotten roads, but not the forgotten people, or not for the Nationals and the Liberals. The Nationals and the Liberals that have put money on the table for these forgotten roads, these roads of neglect, that are so vitally important for people, and it's not just in the member for Parkes electorate. The member for Cowper's electorate, he's made us aware of the Taylor's Arm Road and the Willawarren to Maxwell Road and the South Bank Road, the Tungamar Road and the Bangarang Road, the Bohenia Downs to Woorabinda Road and the Taroom to Bohenia Downs Road, the Dog Fence Road off Brownswell Highway. It is the dynamics of this side of the House that will look after these people and reach out to them so that they can be a part of our nation and be attached to the services like everybody else. Now, the member for Parkes also asked for any alternative policies, and of course, that is what the Australians are focused on. They're focused on the Green Labor coalition.
The next question is about the Emergency Response Fund, and it's such a technical thing. I don't fully understand it. As far as I'm aware, it's being used as intended, and there's nothing shady going on. In fact, it might even be being used above and beyond what's necessary or what's expected of the government. But just the way that it sounds, so you have this kind of pool of money set aside, and it's by law only supposed to be used for very specific reasons. That's the Emergency Response Fund. And I'm pretty sure when you draw money from it, it's to a $50 million limit or something like that, and you can only do it 3 times in a year. I don't know, it's how it was set up. There's laws in place to ensure that it only operates in a certain way. So I feel as if the issues are with the way it was set up in the first place and not with how the government's overseeing its use today. However, so you got this massive fund, right? And it's obviously, they're not just going to put it under a mattress. They put it into some kind of an investment. Maybe it's like a term deposit or something, I don't know. But it's making interest. And so their claim is, you're not using this money, you're just making interest on it, which is, that's better than nothing. I don't think this question is asked in sincerity. It's not seeking an answer. It's kind of just pointing out a problem. And I think that's the kind of political games that we've grown used to seeing. Anyway, you can check out some of the answer. It's obviously complicated. I can't entirely wrap my head around the whole situation. But
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. Last night at Senate estimates, an official confirmed that 3 years after it was announced, not a single cent of the $4.8 billion Emergency Response Fund has been spent on disaster recovery. And in that time, it has earned $836 million in interest. What sort of incompetent government sets aside $4.8 billion for disaster recovery and doesn't spend a cent?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member would be aware, Mr. Speaker, that dedicated funds were provided for the bushfire recovery program and resilience packages. Mr. Speaker, that is more than $2 billion that was directly allocated to ensure that we could support those communities affected by the Black Summer bushfires. The measure that the member is referring to is a long-term measure which enables funds to be drawn down to support the resilience of communities over the long term. So more than $2 billion, including the most recent round of grants which has been provided into the members' community themselves, most recently over the Christmas-New Year period, Mr. Speaker, hitting the ground. They were announced by the Minister only recently, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the many funds and grants that were put in place. Now, I particularly welcome the contribution as we work through that period of Andrew Constance, Mr. Speaker. I particularly welcome the contribution from Andrew Constance, Mr. Speaker.
I think the eruption at this point is because Andrew Constance, some time ago during the bushfire season, had a massive go at ScoMo because his community was being directly affected. But now, during the floods, he's silent, if not backing the Prime Minister. I don't think his electorate has been directly impacted this time, as in the flood season. It was in the fire season, but not in the flood season. And so I think people are thinking that there's a bit of only caring about the issues that affect you, not having any interests in, other Australians. Like this Andrew Constance guy. When there's bushfires in his electorate, it's the end of the world. When there's floods in Australia, as long as it doesn't affect him, he seems perfectly fine with it. So I don't know, and that's what I understand this to be. Anyway, moving on. Just before ScoMo finishes his answer, Albo stands up for a point of order on relevance because I think, he was kind of just talking up this Constance guy who I think is up for re-election or something like that. So Albo calls it out and Speaker's like, what can I do? He's got 6 seconds left and I couldn't hear a freaking word.
It was Andrew Constance, Mr.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The level of interjection is too high. Member of Eden Monero, you asked the question. You of all people should be listening for the answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I can say to those electors in Gilmore, Mr Speaker, that Andrew Constance, as our Liberal candidate for Gilmore, Mr Speaker, will be a great advocate for you here in this place, as he proved to be in the seat of Bega in the State Parliament, as he proved to be, Mr Speaker, always taking these issues up directly. Is this a point of order?
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. On relevance, it's about the impact on real people in the member for Eden Montero's electorate. Not an opportunity for
Leader of the
political
Opposition
spruiking.
will
It's about real people, some of whom are still...
I don't know how many times I have to say this, but if you want me to rule on points of order, the level of interjections is ridiculously high. The Prime Minister has the call for just 6 seconds. I can't rule on the point of order of relevance because I just simply can't hear the Prime Minister enough over the wall of interjections. All members of the House are on a general warning. Pointing and gesticulating from the member for McEwen is not helpful. At least it's quiet.
The next question is from an independent called Zali Stegel. Her question is about some kind of a local business that's going to have to shut its doors because of COVID, and she's like, what's the government going to do? They kind of issue with her raising a question at all, or just reminding people that she exists, is that at the time that this question time happened, which was the 15th of Feb, she had basically just been exposed as a fraud, receiving fraudulent donations from a coal mining company, of all things. So the issue was she was trying to split the donation up into smaller packages so that she didn't have to disclose that it came from the mining company. Nobody was, ready to hear from her at this question time. And so Frydenberg basically says what everyone's thinking. Check it out.
I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Just this morning, I received an email from a local business in Manly on the verge of closing their doors after 63 years of trading. Revenue's down, they're struggling for staff, and there is no tourism. I commend Treasurer Keane and the new...
Will just resume her seat for a moment. Now the level of interjections on my right is precluding me from hearing the question. The member for Warringah has the right to ask her question in silence, if for no other reason so that I can hear it and the person who the question is directed at, who I still couldn't hear, can also hear the question. The member for Warringah has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. May I commence from the top?
Yes,
thank you.
Please.
Just this morning, Treasurer, I received an email. Will you commit to support struggling businesses in Warringah and New South Wales?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and hope that letter she received had a $100,000 cheque and it was properly disclosed, Mr Speaker, because these independents are speaking from both sides of their mouth, Mr Speaker. The last thing they are is a true independent. Now, the reality is...
Anyway, the next question is from Liberal and is for Frydenberg, so more of what we expect to see. He's just talking about jobs and growth. Unemployment lowest it's ever been. We so good. We lowering taxes every day, bro. He gets to a bit where he's like, and beware the Greens and Labor being friends because they're gonna form a coalition. We all know it's gonna happen. And a member of opposition business stands up and he should just be very specific and say, I can't see how the Greens-Labor coalition is relevant to the question that was asked. Because it's not. And so Frydenberg should be pulled up on that.
And beware those who protest too much. The other day it was the Leader of the Opposition ruling out partnerships with the Greens, even though he was part of a government that was in partnership with the Greens. Today, it's the Leader of the Greens who's ruling out a partnership with the Labor Party, even though he was celebrating the fact that he's calling his own members shadow ministers, Mr Speaker. Now, this Leader of the Opposition, this Leader of the Labor Party, who's never held a Treasury portfolio, who's never delivered a budget, but who has tabled his Year 7 economics assignments.
The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, on direct relevance, I just don't see how this is possibly in any way directly relevant to the question that was
Manager
asked.
of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Treasurer was asked about alternative approaches in relation to economic recovery. The Treasurer is being relevant. The Treasurer will... The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. The Treasurer has the call.
Anyway, the next question from Labor is about the floods again, and it's just about how apparently ScoMo failed everybody. I can't comment on whether he has or hasn't. He reckons he hasn't. Of course he does. He gets to the end of his answer. The only interesting part in it is at the end, and it's when he mentions Andrew Constance's name again. And I don't know whether the member opposition business was thinking that this was another kind of spruik for a potential Liberal candidate. I'm not sure what he was going to do, but he was obviously going to stand up for a point of order. But ScoMo had finished his answer, so he can't raise the point of order. Just keep that in mind for what's going to happen later on.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Over the weekend, the New South Wales Premier said South Coast communities were still struggling with bushfire recovery and admitted his government could have done better. Will the Prime Minister also admit he failed my community by failing to deliver the support he promised?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it was the Liberal member for Bega, Andrew Constance, who brought that to the government, worked closely with the government, despite, Mr. Speaker, his strong views, and I thank the Liberal candidate for Gilmore now for that.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer. Manager of Opposition Business. The
next question is from Liberal. As is kind of becoming a pattern, you get the question being asked of, whatever MP.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
That MP begins by answering it.
Mr. Speaker, our government has always been consistent when it comes to these matters, so it is important that you're consistent on these things and that you stand for what you believe in on these issues, and I have always done so, whether as a minister, as a backbencher, as a shadow minister, as a treasurer, Mr. Speaker, as a social services minister, and indeed as a Prime Minister.
And then tries to find a way to make the opposition look bad.
But, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Labor Party together with the Greens, cannot make that same claim.
Labor just can't sit there and take it. So as soon as ScoMo starts talking about the things that Albo has voted down in the past or the present or the future, or who cares, right? Like, they still feel the need to stand up and raise a point of order just to kind of interrupt the flow of ScoMo's thought pattern, I guess. And say, relevance, that's not relevant. It's like, he was asked for alternative approaches, so yeah, it is relevant. Like, what a waste of time, and what a waste of a point of order. I just can't, with all these points of orders that just don't mean anything, that just say, point of order, relevance. I can't see how this is relevant. And what can the Speaker do except say, well, yeah, it's relevant actually, keep going.
Mr. Speaker, it was the Leader of the Labor Party who voted against the Strengthening the Character Test bill. It was the Leader of the Labor Party who opposed our bill to crack down on child sex offenders. On border protection, they voted 77 times against measures to strengthen our borders. They voted 22 times, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Relevant, Speaker.
No,
the question didn't call for an absolute general spray, which is what we're getting now.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The Prime Minister is referring to alternative approaches in relation to law enforcement and national security. The Prime Minister is in order and has the call.
Drives me nuts. Anyway, so ScoMo keeps going.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Who would trust him with protecting our borders, Mr. Speaker, together with the Greens? Mr. Speaker, this is the Leader of the Labor Party who we know what he's for when it comes to national security, protecting our borders, Mr. Speaker. And there are 4 letters
time has expired.
I'll have to wait for next time.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Just love that. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Just, how dare you let him get away with saying all those awful things about me. Anyway, Dutton doesn't like this question. He stands up and he's like, actually, you can't ask that question because Gladys Berejiklian herself has said she never said those things. Correctly, the Speaker says, well, actually, I can't be the arbiter of fact, so the public will have to decide whether or not the question is based on a lie or not. I don't know. I think that's fair. Dutton just didn't like the question and gave it his best shot, I suppose.
My question is addressed to the Prime Minister, and I refer to his last two answers in response to members whose electorates were ravaged by bushfires and where people are still living in caravans. Isn't his response exactly what former Premier Gladys Berejiklian was referring to when she stated, quote, "Lives are at stake today and he's just obsessed with petty political point scoring," in the same text message where she went on to say he was actively spreading a word that's unparliamentary?
The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, it's against the standing orders for the Leader of the Opposition to unnecessarily name someone to start with in relation to that quote. It's not necessary, Mr Speaker. And more importantly than that, Mr Speaker...
Just pause for a moment there. Members on my left, I need to hear the point of order.
More importantly, Mr Speaker, the former Premier of New South Wales has stated in response to that rumour and the article to which the Leader of the Opposition refers that they are not her words. She has clarified that, Mr Speaker. And this guy misleading with his glass jaw isn't going to change it.
The Leader of the House, Sir, as Jimmy said, I don't need to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business. I don't need to hear from him. I'm not in a position to be able to be an arbiter as to who has said what. The question is in order, and the Prime Minister has the call.
Anyway, so ScoMo has a shot at answering the question, and the only interesting part happens at the end, where he starts to throw some darts, I guess, I don't know, at Albo. He's just like, oh, the Leader of the Opposition has been exploiting natural disasters for political gain since the beginning of the pandemic, and blah, blah, blah. And so obviously he's having to go, the Leader of the Opposition. Whether or not he's making personal reflections that are out of order, that's probably what Member of Opposition Business was going to say. Whether or not he was is, up for debate. But ScoMo finishes his answer, so technically there's no opportunity for the Member of Opposition Business to raise the point of order. This happened in the previous question, or a couple of questions ago, you'll recall. And so he stands up and he's just like super frustrated because the Speaker's like, actually he's finished his answer, so sit back down. And he's like, well, can they keep doing this? Can they wait until the end of the question to just chuck a whole bunch of garbage at us and then we can't defend ourselves because it's the end of their answer? Like, what the hell, bro? Anyway, the Speaker's like, well, I mean, that's how the rules work and I can't tell when they're going to finish an answer, so tough luck, buddy. And he basically warns him. He says, well, look, the question itself was almost out of order, so you're kind of lucky you got away with asking the question in the first place.
And we continue to support the communities when it comes to their resilience and their recovery on the ground all over the country, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party has been seeking to exploit natural disasters for political gain for the last 3 years, Mr Speaker. It's a grubby tactic on his behalf and it reflects on his character, and he's failed the character test.
The Leader of the Opposition.
When my point of order goes to the nature of rulings as to whether or not you will intervene in advance of a point of order being taken when answers are clearly going beyond the standing orders. At the moment, we're getting, at the end of answers, this diatribe, which the moment we then stand up to raise it when an intervention hasn't already occurred, the Minister just says, oh no, now I've finished. And this is happening consistently now.
I thank the Manager of Opposition Business on the point of order, for the point of order. I can't determine when a question is going to be finished. That's a matter for the person that's answering the question. But what I will say is this. I think that line of questioning, the wording, is bordering on argument and inferences, even if it is quoting the then Premier of New South Wales. I think the Manager of Opposition Business know exactly what I'm talking about. So I let the question through, but it was bordering on being out of order in any event.
Interesting. Anyway, the next question gets juicy. We get the same guy as last time. The member for, just let me check his very long title. The Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs. So he's got a lot of things to look after. Anyway, he talked about in the previous question time the bill that they've had before Parliament for 1,200 days. A bill. I love the way he put that last time. Anyway, the question's just about that bill again. So, what more can he say? He basically goes over old ground, repeating how Albo just won't back this bill. Very frustrating for them. They really want to get it through. He mentions a specific example of how the shadow Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Foreign Affairs, Multicultural Affairs, basically put to the House earlier in that day that there was a provision in the Migration Act that would allow for this kind of deportation to occur. And he says, I'll show you what he says specifically, just check it out.
That's why we've had a bill in front of this House for 1,200 days. And I can say that the response from Senator Keneally today again highlights they have no substantial opposition to this bill. She said today that she would use, if she was Immigration Minister, she would use Section 116 of the Migration Act to deport permanent visa holders. And she said, of course, that I should have been aware of that as Minister and had read that section of the Act. There's only one problem with what Senator Keneally has said publicly just before question time today. If she kept reading the Act, she'd get to Section 117 of the Act. And Section 117 says that power can't be used in the case of a permanent visa holder, cannot be cancelled under Section 116. That's millions of visa holders, Mr. Speaker.
I'm not sure whether he's being misleading here, because he doesn't mention the qualifications to that provision, 117, where the holder of the visa must be both in the migration zone and immigration cleared on last entering Australia. I don't know how many people that applies to. So I can't really interpret this very well. It seems pretty ridiculous that, 117 would just blanketly destroy all hope of 116 doing anything, but that's the way he's made it sound. So, I don't know. Who do you trust? Hard to say. Anyway, the juicy bit in this question happens, or in this answer, happens when he uses the words signed a deal. Basically, he accuses Albo of signing a deal with the Greens to oppose this bill. Now, whether or not he's using that language kind of with poetic license, like he probably doesn't mean they physically signed a deal. They may just have some kind of a spoken agreement, or they may have no agreement at all, and they just kind of telekinetically are on the same wavelength. I don't know. Hard to say. Anyway, the Manager of Opposition Business doesn't like it either way. He's like, you can't just say lies because lies aren't relevant. And that's when the Speaker is like, well, I can't be an arbiter of fact, so whether or not they're lies, that's not up to me. So as long as what he's saying, true or untrue, is relevant to the question, he's allowed to say it. And then Albo is like, but the context is, right? And it's just like, yeah, it's a serious matter. These are serious crimes, we understand. But, I can't be an arbiter of fact. Yeah, but the context, bro, the context is. And he's like really animated and quite frustrated that his microphone is just not on. He doesn't have the call. And so you just see this whole 10-second Albo waving his hand and screaming something. We can't really hear it because his mic's not on. The Speaker hasn't given him the call. It's funny to see. Check it out.
It is inexplicable that the Leader of the Opposition has signed a deal with the member for Melbourne on relation to this bill to oppose these laws, when you consider what they do to protect Australians and protect us from future harm and future crimes.
The Minister will resume his seat. Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, this claim, which is untrue, about some signed deal, how on earth can that be directly relevant when it's not true. You've got a minister making it up. You've got a minister not answering the
Opposition
question.
Business on a point of will resume his seat. The manager of opposition business knows full well that my role is not to say what is correct and what is not. No. I'm going to give the call to the minister. There's 6 seconds left to go. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
The minister just made an accusation, and it's concerned. The context of the accusation is about violence against women and children.
The Leader of the Opposition.
That's the context.
The Leader of the Opposition. If there's been an unparliamentary remark, you're entitled to.
I'm not. It's not unparliamentary language, Mr. Speaker. He has made a clear allegation that a deal has been done, a signed deal, relating to the violence against women
Leader of the
and
Opposition
children.
will resume his seat. Look, let me just say this. If an unparliamentary remark has been used, then a member is entitled to rise in his or her place and raise it. But to raise an issue that something is factually incorrect is not an appropriate point of order during question time. Members know when there is an appropriate time for that to take place. No.
Kicked it out. You can't take it.
You don't have the call. I haven't given the Leader of the Opposition the call. The minister has the call.
Speaker, the truth is the Labor and the Greens voted against this bill, and I don't believe, and Australians don't believe, the member for Melbourne is just someone that he used to know.
The minister's time has expired.
Anyway, the next question is for ScoMo, but the Minister of Home Affairs is given the opportunity to answer it, which is basically ScoMo's way of just handballing the question off to someone else. The question itself is about the Safer Communities Fund, which I guess is a fund of money to make sure that communities get safer. Anyway, the allegation is that this fund has been used politically to kind of add money and add funds to seats that aren't necessarily secured by Liberal in the upcoming election. Like, they want to invest money in the seats where then, there's a little bit of risk of them losing. So the Prime Minister is basically being asked, why isn't this fund being used for a very specific instance in which, there is some kind of terrorist activity? And the Minister of Home Affairs just dodges the question, says or claims that it's being used with the best intentions and doesn't address the specific scenario that Labor's bringing up. And they call her out. There's like a point of order. They call her out and they're like, bro, just be specific, answer us. Why is this specific community not being helped out by the fund?
The Prime Minister expanded the Safer Communities Fund after the Christchurch terrorist attacks to address risks associated with racial intolerance. The same fund, the Auditor-General has now confirmed, was used to favour coalition seats. The Holland Park Mosque applied for a grant after being subject to a number of Islamophobic attacks, including vandalism that referenced the Christchurch shooter as a saint and someone wielding a machete. Why did they miss out?
The member has raised issues in relation to the Safer Communities funding and the way that grant funding is allocated. And can I say that there has been a number of applications that have been made from communities right around Australia. Now, as a government, we have always acted in the best interest of our communities. Now, clearly, in relation to grant funding, and I do make this point very sincerely, in relation to the Safer Communities Fund, were complied with.
Order. Now, the member will resume. The minister will resume her seat for one moment. Don't go too far. The member for Lyons will go to the microphone and withdraw that comment.
I withdraw.
And will now withdraw from the chamber under 94A. The minister has the call.
Now, there were a range of programs that were assessed by the department, and yes, there was some intervention from ministers and some of...
Order. Members on my left.
where a specific question was asked about a mosque that had a swastika daubed on it, and this minister cannot answer the question at all and has gone around in generalities.
The member for Chifley will resume his seat. I accept that there was a degree of specificity about the member for Blacksland. Well, that is entirely inappropriate. The question goes to the Safer Community Fund. It did expressly go to a specific mosque. If the minister is able to comment on a specific application, the minister should say so. If the minister can't, the minister should say so. But the minister has been asked about Safer Community Fund. She is relevant. The member for McEwen will leave under 94A. The member for McEwen will leave under 94A. The minister has the call.
And she just can't. She can't bring herself to explain. She says, "Oh, we've gotten the application. We're looking into it, maybe." But yeah, she just dances around the issue a little bit. And it's funny. It's funny because the next question is for the Minister for Home Affairs from Liberal. And so she's going to get up there and talk about how, Labor's so bad while we're so good. And yeah, Minister for Opposition Business has a big issue with that. He raises a good point, actually. Check it out.
Is the Minister aware of any alternate approaches?
You will get the call. The Manager for Opposition Business.
In terms of the expected order of this House, we've got a minister who's now going to be prepared to answer about alternatives, but had no idea and refuses to answer about a mosque that gets a swastika painted on it. Like, are they doing their job at all? At all? They prepare the alternative.
I really don't need the advice from members on my right. The minister has the call.
Anyway, she doesn't actually say anything too interesting in her answer. Basically just a classic Liberal good, led bad spiel that we've been hearing from every Liberal MP since the beginning of the year. Anyway, moving on. Next question from Labor is about childcare, and it's specifically childcare is going up in price while wages are going down in price. Not really going down in price, but wages are going down. So what gives? How are we supposed to afford childcare now?
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Childcare fees have gone up nearly 40% since this government came to office, but real wages have gone backwards, falling $700 in the last year alone. Hasn't it become harder for working families to make ends meet under this almost decade-old government?
The answer just basically goes to how much they are supporting families who have kids in childcare. And, seems to me like they make a convincing argument that there is a lot of support and money being thrown at families who have kids in childcare. So, I don't really know what the question was trying to do. This guy, at least, was very, very competently answered the question, how are families supposed to afford childcare? It seems like it should be pretty easy based on the answer that he's given.
From the 7th of March this year. So in just 2 or 3 weeks, the average Australian family with a second or third child in childcare will be $2,200 better off. And if we think through average out-of-pocket costs for centre-based daycare are $4 an hour compared to $4.87 an hour in June 2018. And around 90% of families using childcare are entitled to a childcare subsidy of between 50 and 85%.
Just free money being thrown at people, apparently, who have kids in childcare. So yeah, I don't know what the question was trying to get Liberal to do. The next question is from Liberal. I'm not sure. It's not a very interesting question. It's just about, women. We'll skip over that and go to the next question, which comes from Labor. And it's the biggest we've run out of questions I've ever seen. It's about the aged care again. And we remember how on the ball Greg Hunt was in answering those questions previously. They're not going to catch him off guard with this question. He's going to sound very prepared, and he does. He speaks for the full 3 minutes, runs out of time. I don't know, just doesn't look like a very good use of Labor's limited supply of questions. They were obviously running out at this point. Check it out.
More than 700 people have died of COVID in aged care just this year alone. Tens of thousands are not receiving the care they deserve. The Prime Minister cut $1.7 billion from aged care, and he's refused to sack his totally incompetent minister. Why won't the Prime Minister just do his job and fix aged care?
In terms of the actions that have been taken during the course of the pandemic, we have at this stage delivered 83.4% of booster coverage to the eligible population, over 82,000 surge positions that have been made available, 50 million units of PPE, 13.9 million rapid antigen tests, $17.7 billion at last year's budget in response to the Royal Commission. Not just the largest investment in aged care in Australian history, but the largest response to any Royal Commission at any time in Australian history. That includes over $7 billion for home care, over $8 billion all up for residential aged care. There is also the $600 million now through full retention bonus payments to support those staff. It's one of the lowest rates of loss of life in the world in aged care, and we thank our staff and honour them for that.
The next question from Liberal is for Dutton, and it's just about, defence. So obviously it's going to be another one of those we're really good at defence, you're really bad at defence kind of question and answers. So Dutton stands up, begins to answer. He's like, we're really good at defence. But he doesn't talk for too long before he's like, and I'm asked about alternative approaches. And so Labor's like, well, that's early in the question. We better do something to put an end to this. And so they stand up and they don't say point of order relevance. They just launch straight in. Yeah, point of order. You're right in saying, say spew garbage basically. And the Speaker's like, bro, you gotta state your point of order. You gotta state what it is before you actually explain it to us. So he comes back and he's like, is it relevance? He's like, yes, it is relevance. And the Speaker's like, well, look, he's being relevant, but I'll give you this. You're kind of launching into the alternative approaches side of the question a little bit earlier than I'd like. Like, spend some good time explaining your side before you have a go at the opposition. Otherwise the question, what's the point of it? You should just stand up and say, have you heard of alternative approaches? Which is fair enough. Dutton does this compare the pair thing, which we'll see a little bit later on. Just remember that compare the pair phrase.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister please update the House on the Morrison government's strong and effective measures to protect Australians from harm? Is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
Mr. Speaker, it is the case that our nation, and indeed the world of course, faces one of the most complex and potentially catastrophic international security environments since the Second World War. And this government will do, Mr. Speaker, everything we can within our power to keep our country safe, to avoid any conflict in our region, and to stare down those people that would seek to initiate conflict in our region. But, Mr. Speaker, you need to argue from a position of strength, and you need to have strong character, Mr. Speaker, to be able to do it. And the problem, Mr. Speaker, is that when I am asked about alternative approaches, it really makes you focus, Mr. Speaker.
The Minister will resume his seat. The Minister will resume his seat. Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is right in describing us as facing the most difficult strategic circumstances we've had, but he can't keep on them for more than 80 seconds before going for alternative approaches. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Now, the Minister for Defence is making actually a bit of a habit of this. He's returning to the dispatch box before being called. The Minister for Defence will resume his seat. I was just about to say the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, if he wants to make a point of order, he's entitled to do that, but he needs to state the point of order. First up, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, just return to the dispatch box. Is your point of order relevance? Indeed it is.
All right, thank you. What I will say is this. The Minister for Defence was asked a question about what the government is doing in relation to strong and effective measures, and then also asked about alternative approaches. The Minister does need to before he launches into an alternative approaches response, does need to state what the government's policies are that would, in effect, give the government strong and effective measures. So I would ask the minister to deal with that before. Otherwise, I know the minister has been spoken to about this by Speaker Smith. Otherwise, you're comparing an alternative approach to what? So the Minister for Defence has the call.
If I'm asked to compare the pair, I will compare the pair, Mr. Speaker.
And the next question I find a little bit interesting. It kind of proves how futile question time can be sometimes. So the question is very specific. The question is pretty useless when you boil it down to its pure essential form. So it's a bad example of the issue that I think it points out. But nonetheless, the question is just simply, your text message to the French president, ScoMo, was leaked. How can you expect us to believe that you'll keep anything confidential, like your cabinet discussions, for instance, when your text messages, of all things, leak? Like, bro, far out.
My questions to the Prime Minister. The Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet confirmed at Senate estimates that no one has investigated the leaking of text messages between the Prime Minister and the French President. Can the Prime Minister explain how this personal text message on his phone was leaked? How can the Prime Minister expect Cabinet discussions to remain confidential when his communications with foreign leaders leak?
Now, because he mentioned the leaking of the text message, ScoMo is well within his rights to purely focus on that. Just not talk about anything else, not talk about cabinet discussions, not his potentially irresponsible text messaging behaviours. He can just focus on that leaked text message and purely talk about that. And he's not being irrelevant. And, what can they do? They can't raise a point of order against relevance because he's being relevant. Like, the guy mentioned the text message. ScoMo's talking about the text message. He doesn't have to address all this other stuff, though. And so that makes it very difficult. When you want to ask a question, you basically can only include the things that you actually want to be addressed. Imagine you were debating whether or not you should loan somebody money, and you said something to them like, the local library loaned you a book and you never returned it. So how could you be trusted with this small loan of $1 million or whatever? It's obviously you can't even return a library book on time. How are you going to be trusted with a large sum of money? If the person's response to that accusation that they can't be trusted with things to which they are loaned, if their response was simply, well, about that library book, blah, 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 the library book, and they never addressed, the how could you be trusted with the loan, you'd be so frustrated because I don't really care about the library book. I'm just trying to show to you that you can't be trusted with this loan. It's hard to explain exactly what's in my head, but I feel like in question time, a lot of the time, in question time, you'll ask a question and the answerer will just find a way to remain relevant while answering as little of the question as possible. And it's just frustrating to see because they're technically not doing anything illegal. Anyway, that was a long dissection of the question and we haven't even gotten to the answer, so check it out.
The Prime Minister has...
Speaker, I'm asked about my communications with other leaders, and particularly the French President, Mr Speaker. And I can confirm, Mr Speaker, that when I spoke to the French President back in June, I was very clear with the French President that the conventionally powered diesel submarines, Mr Speaker, that we had entered into agreement to do with the French government through the Naval Group, Mr Speaker, would not meet our strategic requirements given the situation in our region. I was very clear about those capabilities.
The member for Gorton on a point of order.
On relevance, the question I asked was whether, in fact, the Prime Minister could confirm how his text message was leaked, and how can we in any way trust this Prime Minister about cabinet leaks if he cannot in any way determine how his text message was leaked in relation to it?
It's not an opportunity to ask the question again, member for Gorton. The question goes to the dealings of the Prime Minister and the President of France. and the leaking of text messages, the Prime Minister is relevant and has the call.
We had to advise the French government that we would not be continuing. And if those opposite think there is a friendly way or an easy way, Mr Speaker, to tell another country that a $90 billion contract can't be continued with, Mr Speaker, I'm all ears. If I have to decide between Australia's national security interest, Mr Speaker, or potentially offending someone, Mr Speaker, I choose Australia. We know what the Leader of the Opposition would do.
Yeah, so he just never addresses the confidentiality of Cabinet. He never demonstrates that we could in any way trust him to keep anything confidential in the future. Instead, he just talks about submarines because that was relevant to the text message which was used in the wording of the question. The next question is like the most boring Liberal ad you could imagine. It's about like social media and stuff. The only interesting bit is where they mention that they're apparently trying to put through Parliament an anti-trolling bill to, quote, crack down on trolls. Epic. Love to see my taxpayer money go into good use. I'm kidding, I don't pay taxes.
Or the Counter-Terrorism Legislation Amendment Sunsetting Review and Other Measures Bill, and the Crimes Amendment Remission of Sentences Bill, as well, for example, as the Independent National Security Legislation Monitor Amendment Bill. Mr Speaker, we've also introduced the Anti-Trolling Bill to crack down on anonymous trolls making defamatory comments online.
Yeah, no, it's just boring question, boring answer. Moving on. Let's get to the juicy stuff. Next question from Labor is about the price of meat. Juicy stuff, which has gone up, and wages going down. What gives? So pretty much the exact same question as the childcare one. It's basically just saying, hey, cost of living is going up, wages aren't. How are Australians supposed to survive? And so ScoMo talks about like cost of living stuff, and they're like, hold on, our question was about beef, juicy stuff. And it's like, what do you, how specific do you have to be? Like, yeah, the cost of beef has gone up, but surely that's indicative of, you know, the cost of living going up. So
the price of beef has increased by 65% since this government came to office, but real wages have gone backwards, falling $700 in the last year alone. Hasn't it become harder for working families to make ends meet under this almost decade-old government?
There are considerable pressures on cost of living, the inflationary environment that we're facing and the economic uncertainty that is a function of many things, but including what we're seeing in Ukraine. The inflationary pressures that Australia faces means financial management of the budget, Mr Speaker. I've done 3 as a Treasurer, I've done 3 as a Prime Minister and 1 as the member of the Expenditure Review Committee. And that's what you need, Mr Speaker, when
Leader
it
of the
comes...
Opposition on a point just before. Members on my right. Members on my right. The Deputy Prime Minister. The Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker, on relevance. The question was about the price of beef going up as an example of pressures on
the
cost
Leader
of
of the
living.
Opposition
The
will
Prime
resume
Minister
seat.
spoke.
Yep. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. No one can hear you, the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister. What I will say to the Prime Minister is that the question was quite specific around cost of living. And I would ask the Prime Minister to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm addressing what the pressures on inflation are in this country, and which goes to cost of living. But let's compare the pair.
No. There's no compare the pair. The question was not asked for alternatives.
Well, Mr Speaker, let me address cost of living.
Anyway, the next question from Liberals is a little bit fear-mongering, not really worth watching. It's just about how a foreign intervention into the political process was stopped somehow. Apparently someone from another country was trying to influence an election here in Australia and it got stopped. So why are we hearing about this? I don't know. But yeah, welcome to question time. Anyway, moving on. The next question is like, it is proof that they've run out of questions because it's just like, Prime Minister has not been doing his job. Why won't the Prime Minister do his job? And it's like, what do you, how do you answer that question and not be relevant somehow? Like, you could say anything at all related to anything Prime Minister related, and it would be relevant to the question. So ScoMo leaps at the opportunity to basically just make it sound like he's done heaps, and he does, so bravo.
Why does the Prime Minister always fail to anticipate problems before they occur, fail to listen to expert warnings, and act too little, too late? Why doesn't he ever do his job? Thank the member for the opportunity to tell you about the job we've been doing, and this is just since late 2001. Record high employment. The economy added 64,800 jobs.
Anyway, final question from Liberal is about making sure that our veterans are looked after, which is sure a noble thing to be talking about, but yeah, it's a Liberal ad. Question time finishes when ScoMo says his famous thing that he says when question time finishes.
I ask that further questions to be placed on the notice.
And Albo gets up to make a personal statement. But yeah, the Speaker laughs when he sees Albo stand up because he's like, bro, you do this all the time. Like, what does he have to say? He has to say that Frydenberg mentioned his school paper. Actually, it was a university paper. Bro, you've been misrepresented hard. Like, thank goodness you were able to clear that one up.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to give a personal explanation.
Does the Leader of the Opposition claim to have been misrepresented?
I do, Mr Speaker, and we'd be here for some time if I went through all of them. But
the Leader of the Opposition has
I'll just pick on one, Mr Speaker, which was that the Treasurer in his comments continues to refer to my school paper on economics. It was actually a paper I wanted to table for my Bachelor of Economics degree, something that his opponents here and here don't have.
I'm glad to hear finally that it was actually a university paper. Respect levels like way up now. Anyway, that's the end of question time. Imagine, another one done. We'll try and whiz through the next couple. See how we go, but this one was very long. Hopefully, I haven't checked the other ones, but hopefully they're a little bit shorter than this one. Anyway, cheers for watching. Let me know in the comments, what was your favourite bit? I'd be interested to know. Anyway, catch you guys in the next one.